Welcome to This Explainer. Okay, let's just get right into it because today we are tackling literally one of the most universal frustrations out there. You know the feeling, right? You spend hours studying or maybe prepping for a massive meeting, only to feel like all that information just completely vanished from your brain the exact second you closed your laptop. It's incredibly annoying. You put in all that time, but the retention just isn't there. Well, based on some seriously fascinating insights from Lifehacker Japan, we are going to look at a method that fundamentally changes how your brain integrates new information. So ask yourself this. What if you combined two of your current study methods? I want you to really imagine the power of that for a second. Most of us, we kind of just pick one lane. We read a book, or we listen to a lecture, or maybe we draw a quick diagram. We treat all these methods as totally isolated events. But the core concept we're breaking down today asks a really different question. What actually happens when you strategically layer them? All right, let's dive into our roadmap. We are going to start with the promise of 2x learning efficiency, then unpack the science of dual coding theory, get highly actionable with 4 practical techniques, and finally, we'll conquer the ultimate review method, blurting. Section 1. To 2x learning efficiency, the promise of combining methods. Now, achieving double the learning efficiency, that isn't magic. It just requires a bit of strategy. That 2x multiplier is our ultimate goal here. The whole premise is that if you synthesize new information correctly, you can theoretically double both the sheer volume of what you learn and, honestly, more importantly, how much of it actually sticks in your memory long term. You're not just tacking on some random new technique. You are multiplying the effectiveness of the ones you already use. It's all about working smarter by engaging your brain the way it actually naturally wants to be engaged. Moving right along to Section 2, dual coding theory, the science behind the strategy. Look, whenever someone promises to literally double your efficiency, I know the gimmick alarm goes off. Mine does too. But this is deeply grounded in cognitive psychology. It was formulated by Professor Alan Pavio way back in 1971. Dual coding theory hypothesizes that the human brain can process new information using 2 completely different channels, verbally and visually at the exact same time. It was an absolute game changer of an idea. It meant we don't have to choose between words and pictures. Our brains are actually hardwired to handle both simultaneously. Think of it like this. Our brains utilize 2 separate processing channels. Over on the verbal side, you have your standard reading, listening, and speaking. And then on the visual side, you've got drawing, mapping, and visualizing. Normally, we lean super heavily on that verbal side when we're trying to learn something. But Pavio realized that if you activate both of these processing channels at the exact same time, you're basically opening up this massive, high-speed highway for information to travel straight into your long-term memory. Now, you might be thinking, wait a second, won't doing 2 things at once just totally overload my brain? Won't I actually end up learning less? And hey, that's a completely valid fear. But researchers have actually proven that using 2 processing methods simultaneously genuinely increases item recall. Why? Because the visual and verbal channels operate independently in the brain. They don't compete for resources. Instead, they reinforce each other. You're not crashing your brain's hard drive. You're essentially just plugging in a second one. Which brings us to Section 3, 4 practical techniques, how to apply this today. Theory is fantastic, but we want actual results, right? So here is your master cheat sheet for the 4 practical strategies we're about to explore. Try to spot the pattern here. We take a standard action, like listening, reading, or memorizing, and we deliberately pair it with a very specific visual addition. The beauty of dual coding is that while the science sounds complex, executing it is just surprisingly simple. So let's break these down one by one. First up, listen plus draw. The absolute most basic version of this is just doodling to represent what you're hearing during a recorded lecture or a meeting. But you can take it a massive step further. You can use AI software like Google's NotebookLM to actually generate a custom podcast about your study materials, and then doodle while you listen to that. Or, and this is even better, record a self-made podcast of you just reading your own notes out loud. Think about it. You get multiple exposures. You write the script, you read it aloud, you listen back, and you draw while you listen. It heavily anchors that auditory information deeply into your brain. Technique number 2 is read plus mind map. So once you finish reading a specific section or chapter of a book, don't just immediately flip the page and move on. Stop for a second. Actually draw out a mind map explaining the concepts you just read. Now, quick word of caution here. While AI tools can instantly generate mind maps for you, the source material explicitly advises against fully automated maps. Why? Because you completely lose the active participation. It's so much better to use an app like Xmind or honestly just a piece of paper so you are actively engaged in drawing those connections yourself. The physical act of mapping is what actually locks it in. Let's move to our third technique, which builds right off that. Read plus timeline. This one is an absolute lifesaver for historical texts or complex project sequences. As you read your notes or a book, you manually extract the chronological events and map them out on a separate piece of paper. You're taking these dense, purely verbal paragraphs and translating them into a really clear visual flow of time. It totally forces you to understand the actual relationship between events rather than just rotely memorizing isolated facts. And our fourth strategy, memorize plus images. If you use flashcards, we absolutely need to supercharge them. Tons of apps allow you to add photos, charts, or infographics right onto your text-based cards. And when you pair this text and image combo with the Lightner system, which by the way is a classic spaced repetition method tailored perfectly to the forgetting curve, you create an incredibly powerful memory hack. The image triggers the word triggers the image, and the spaced repetition ensures the whole thing stays locked in your long-term memory for sure. Finally, section 4, ultimate review, blurting, the boss level of dual coding. Okay, so we've covered exactly how to take information in, but how do we prove that it actually stuck? Enter visual blurting. Now, traditional blurting is when you read something, slam the book shut, and just feverishly write down everything you remember. It's a pretty intense brain dump. But visual blurting upgrades the whole process. Instead of just writing out a wall of text, you output everything you recall directly into a visual format, like a timeline or a mind map. And here is the absolute genius part. You intentionally leave blank spaces for the specific details you know you've forgotten. The most crucial point here is strictly following this exact sequence. You read normally, you close the book, and you draw out your visual map strictly from memory. By leaving those physical blank spaces for the things you can't quite recall, you are essentially creating a safe visual map of your own knowledge gaps. You're exposing exactly what you don't know yet. Then, once you're done, you just open the book back up and easily fill in those blank spaces and make your final review incredibly targeted so you aren't wasting time studying what you already know. So, what does this all mean for you? We've looked at the science, the 4 practical methods, and that awesome boss-level review tactic. The ball is entirely in your court now. What will you dual code today? Think about it. The next time you sit down for a study session or you need to prep for a major presentation, are you going to stick to the old, frustrating habit of just staring blankly at text? Or will you actually activate both sides of your brain and make that information stick for good? I challenge you to pick just one of these techniques, maybe doodle during a podcast or draw out a mind map tonight, and just watch how your brain responds. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you on the next one.